And most people I know at 40 years old, a lot of times they're in a mentally stuck place. And for me, I was in a mentally stuck place, but I had this will and drive because I looked around and I saw that I had no friends, I had no family. My kids were gone, off with their mother doing the Jehovah's Witness thing. My parents were off doing their Jehovah's Witness thing. And all the quote-unquote friends I thought I had were not paying attention or even being bothered with me. So I was left in a world where I had no friends or nobody. So I figured, okay, at this point in time, since there's nobody here, I have either two things I can do. I can either commit suicide, which was a constant thought, or I can power myself through, or willpower myself through to something else. And that something else was what I decided. Okay, and there were a lot of times during that process where I thought, I can't do this anymore, but willpower, which is something I think a lot of people have, and I think they're afraid to summon their willpower, but I summoned my willpower, said we're not going to end at 40. We're going to start trying to find a way to live.
Welcome to the Awesome Black Dad Show, where our goal is to give life to stories of fathers in a way that empowers and encourages dads to be a better version of themselves. Today's guest is an ex-Jehovah's Witness that is currently being shunned by his family of active Jehovah's Witnesses. Chris has spent the last 10 years in a state of self-discovery and healing, which, by the way, he is adamant about how successful he has been in his 10-year journey. I met Chris at a roundtable gathering, and after listening to his story, I knew I had to have him on the show. Chris passionately spoke about how his disfellowshipping from the Jehovah's Witness religion completely wrecked his life. Chris lost his wife, his children, his parents, and his friends. I could not imagine losing my loved ones because of a personal decision to go in a different direction from religion and spiritually. We talk so much about how the system breaks up our households, but we never talk about how some religious constructs have the potential to do just as much damage. Today, Chris goes by Freedom's Witness on his YouTube channel, where he shares his stories and insights with others like him, with the hope that he helps others realize that there's a future and it can be a bright one. So without further ado, I introduce to you Mr. Chris Hale. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you very much. Appreciate being on the show.
Yeah, no, we appreciate having you, man. First off, thanks for agreeing to come on to share such a personal journey, man. I really appreciate it, and I know we're going to get into some really interesting things and subject matter, man, so I appreciate it.
Yep, it's exciting.
Yeah. So, Freedom's Witness, what's the meaning behind the name?
Right, so Freedom's Witness came up when I was talking to a buddy of mine, and we were just trying to name the YouTube channel. But Freedom's Witness is all about just that, being free. How do I get freed? How do I maintain my freedom, and then what really is freedom? And as I've gone through this process of leaving the Jehovah's Witness cult and then finding out who I was and who I am and who I'm meant to be and getting free and living in a state of freedom, I am a witness to that and how it can happen to other people. And so that's kind of how I came up with Freedom's Witness. It's not really scientific at all.
Well, I mean, it's a why, right? So everybody has to have a why for why they do a particular thing. So it's a start for sure. So to get into a bit about the religion, so I don't really know much about Jehovah's Witness outside of the fact that they come to our doors on Sunday mornings and knock, and it's like, get away from the windows.
Exactly.
No, you better not open that door.
Don't open that door. Don't look at them. Don't encourage them.
Don't encourage them. Don't do any of that, right? So outside of that, it's always kind of been a closed door religion, from my understanding. But from what I understand, Jehovah's Witnesses beliefs are based in Bible teachings of Charles Russell, the founder of the Bible student movement. Jehovah's Witnesses teach that the present world order, which they perceive as being under the control of Satan, will end by direct intervention by God, right?
Correct.
And they expect that Jesus Christ to come back and fully establish his heavenly government over earth, right? Destroying existing human governments and non-witnesses and creating a cleansed society of true worshipers who can live forever. Is that
Man,
so give me your
you did your research, and
Yeah.
actually that's probably one of the most concise descriptions I've heard in a while, and that is pretty much true to form.
Okay.
So the idea being that Charles Taze Russell starts his organization, and he gets people to believe in a certain way. He starts teaching that the only people that are going to survive on the earth after Armageddon, after God or Jehovah destroys everyone who doesn't believe as they do, are going to live in a paradise absent all the wicked people or all the people that don't believe. And when you think about that, it's actually quite brutal to think that everybody you know, except for the 2 to 3 to 5 million people that are Jehovah's Witnesses on the earth, are all going to be eliminated by this furious God.
When I was doing the research, I was like I get it, but I don't, right? So I understand in theory what I read, but it's like, so there are a number of people that really follow by these constructs, right? That
Yes, actually, and what's so interesting, if you follow any of the growth of the church or the religions over the last 20 years or so, it's not even that they're getting new recruits from off the street. It's mostly people that have grown up in the church or their children that are being pushed to remain in the religion. So it's not even an organic growth. It's really a growth from people that have been part of the religion and their children for years. And every once in a while, you might get some new ones that come in, but for the most part, it's not even growing like that. So the number of followers is dwindling quite a bit, but there's still a tremendous amount of people that still believe that. And I don't even know if they believe it to their core, if they're more afraid of the shunning activity or losing their family, so they stay inside the church. And that's really the controlling functionality that the religion has. They're saying, okay, if you leave, you're going to lose all your family, and that's how they keep people in. So I don't think it's so many people believing that this is actually going to happen, more like people saying, hey, I don't want to lose my family, so I'm going to continue doing what we've been taught to do so I can stay with my friends and my family.
Okay. So tell me about how you were introduced to the religion.
Right. So my mother got introduced to it when she was about 19 or 20 years old, and I was born when she was 20 or 21, so I was kind of born into it. And in the early days of being in the religion, my mother was pretty hardcore, but she wasn't as hardcore as she would become when my father became a Jehovah's Witness. So I was born into it, and for the first 10 or 12 years, life was pretty easy. It wasn't that bad. We'd go to Kingdom Hall. She would pinch us if we weren't paying attention to the things that were coming off the stage. But for the most part, we had a couple good friends. But when things got serious is when my dad became a Jehovah's Witness, and then it just became a whole nother battle after that.
So your mom and dad got married before he decided to become a Jehovah's Witness?
Yeah, so my dad and mom were married when I was born, at least I'm assuming that.
Okay.
And about the time my dad became a witness, I think it was partly my fault or mostly my fault because I had been so ingrained with the idea that anyone who didn't believe the way Jehovah's Witnesses did were going to die in Armageddon, which, by the way, hasn't happened yet.
Right. Fair.
And so what I started doing was campaigning my dad to stop smoking and drinking so that he could become a Jehovah's Witness like all of us, and we could live in the great paradise together. And so after campaigning on that for about 2 or 3 years, my dad finally gave in. He said, okay, I'm going to start studying with the Jehovah's Witnesses, which is what they do. And he got baptized, and next thing you know, my nightmare began.
Wow. Wait, so when your father got into the religion, that's when your nightmare began? Tell us a little bit about what you mean by that.
Okay, so in the religion, they have different roles for people who are serious. You have the ministerial servant, you have the elder, which would be like a pastor in a normal church. And my dad very quickly saw that there was a place for him, because he wasn't an educated man. He was just a laborer for one of the large communication companies, and he got into the church. He's well-spoken, intelligent, good-looking guy, and he quickly figured out that he could rise up through the ranks. And so in order for him to rise up through the ranks, he needed to have all his children kind of acting in a robotic fashion. And I think none of us really wanted to do that, my mother included. I think she just thought we could all be in church together, we can be this big, beautiful family, but no one expected my dad to become so hardcore. He never expected him to really rise in the ranks the way he did, to go from being a ministerial servant to an elder to being the number one elder in our congregation that everybody looked up to. Okay. So in order for him to maintain that kind of power that he had, all his children, we all needed to act a certain way, and nobody wanted to do that, certainly not me. So I think a lot of the harsh disciplinary methods that came into our life after he became a witness were his efforts to try to make us conform to how we should be as good little Jehovah's Witness children.
Well, so what was your relationship like with your father, like prior to him actually joining or becoming a Jehovah's Witness?
I think it was pretty cool. I mean, he was he was always around. My dad he'd go to work every morning, come home at night, but, he smoked and he drank and he did the things with other girls that weren't his wife. He did those kinds of things. And I think we all knew he was doing some of those things, but he was pretty present with me. Like, we'd play baseball and he'd take me out, we'd go fish and do all those things. But after he became a Jehovah's Witness and he started to get promoted within the church, our relationship went to the side very quickly because he couldn't control me. And instead of seeing his son as a reflection of him and his independent spirit, or maybe even saying, okay, I see my son wants to do these things, they're not in line with what the church wants. And in order for me to get promoted and to continue to grow in the church, I can't have him being like a normal worldly kid, quote unquote, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, I do. And that transformation or that transition between the two of you in terms of that relationship, how was it a hard transition? Was he like really rough in terms of like forcing you to do a particular thing, or was he having conversations? Because earlier you were saying that, you're the one that convinced your dad to kind of come over and become Jehovah's Witness, right?
Correct.
And so you would think that in that there's some that there's a decent level of a relationship, but it sounds like once he decided that there's potential for him to grow and gain some power, it sounds like there was a power trip going on. So is that kind of what happened?
Absolutely. So as a father yourself, if you have a 13, 14, 15-year-old boy in the house, there's testosterone growing, right?
Right.
And there are things happening. And so, no, there weren't conversations. There were beatdowns. And
it's not funny, but I understand exactly what you mean.
I'm serious. There were beatdowns, there were fights, there were not conversations. So, son, tell me what it is that you're feeling, or what is it that you want to do. It was either no or no. And I'm talking about physical beatings with a belt and whatever else he could find. Because instead of talking to me and finding out what it was I wanted to do, that wasn't his interest. And I think it could have been partly the way he was raised, but also, hey, look, you're interfering with what I'm trying to do here. I'm not going to have that, so I'm going to beat it out of you. Yeah. And what's interesting, I've learned, is that beating a child, which I never beat my children, but it doesn't really change anything. It just kind of begets more violence. And so as a child, I don't remember having any conversations with my dad about things I wanted to do. It's either my way or the highway. But since you're too young for the highway, it's just my way and there's no other way.
Okay. And so from that experience, not to go too far off, but I feel like we need to just touch on this a little bit. In terms of child rearing, and you say that you don't, and I want to use the word beat loosely because that just suggests something completely different from
right.
From maybe getting a spanking, right? I think that there's a variation there. And you mentioned that you've never did you ever spank your kids, or it's just like you always kind of, what was your perspective of rendering when you had your own kids?
Well, let me take this back for 1 second, because I feel like when my dad would go off into that spanking mode or beating mode, it was done out of anger. Because I don't remember me as a kid doing any single thing that merited the type of beatings I got from my dad or my mother, but mostly from my father. So I decided whenever I had my own kids, I would talk them to death or talk them into compliance, but I would never hit them, because I didn't know at what point my beating them or disciplining them would move over into I'm angry at the world. And I was an angry black man, so I could very well see myself just completely going off. And maybe my father was an angry black man. And so I remember one time getting beat with a belt because I wrote my name in some concrete around the street corner, and the police brought me home, and it was a white cop. He says, kids do this all the time. My dad tried to beat me to death with this belt. And it went on for, I feel like 15 or 20 minutes. I'm like, well, what is this? Are you mad at the world? Who did you wrong? And so because of that perspective, I decided I would never put my hands on my children, which I didn't. Maybe when they were 2, I might tap them a couple times or whatever to get them to listen to me. But as they got older, I never put my hands on them. I would just talk them into death because I didn't know if I was going to be that man that would just turn into beating my kids because I'm angry about something else, yet I don't even know what's driving me.
Right. As you were born into the religion, right? And then, so can you talk us through the point at which you started to begin to have feelings about leaving the religion?
Right. So actually, my feelings about leaving the religion started pretty early because while I was
How early are we? Like
18.
18.
Right.
Okay.
So 18 years old, I'm in high school and doing pretty well, and all the guys are saying, "Hey, where are you going to school?" I'm like, I'm going to go to Ohio State, or I'm going to go here, I'm going to go there. Which in reality, I had no plans to go anywhere because my dad said, if you're not going to pursue the full-time ministry, in other words, you're not going to be what's called a pioneer, which is a person that spends 90 hours a month knocking on doors and trying to convert people, then I can't live in a house. I need to go somewhere else and live, which as an 18-year-old, you think, what do you mean?
Right. And not to get, so when you do that convert, like it's so interesting, like now to kind of dig into what actually happens as a part of that process. Do you keep count of the conversions? Like, how does that work? You go to the door, because I've never really opened the door because I was scared my mom was going to say something to me. But do you keep count and track of those conversions? Like, what goes on in that process?
Absolutely. So there's a whole program designed by the Jehovah's Witnesses around preaching and door-to-door activity, and including learning how to do a presentation, right? Which has probably done me very well in my life because I'm not afraid to talk to people and I can do a presentation very well. So practicing your presentation, what happens when you knock on the door and no one answers? What happens when someone knocks on the door and there's a child? What happens when you knock on the door and someone answers and says, "Get off my porch"? What happens when somebody answers the door with a knife or a gun? All of those scenarios were kind of considered. But typically when you go to the door and you knock on the door and you give your presentation to someone, and if they engage with you and if they invite you back, that's what they call a return visit, and those are good. And you also want to leave as much literature with them as you can, whether or not you're leaving a Watchtower Awake magazine or a Bible or some other kind of literature. But ideally, you want them to invite you into their house so you can sit down and study the Bible with them and engage in some sort of religious debate, which is typically one-sided because we're not interested in what you have to say. We want you to hear what we have to say because we came knocking on your door, which is completely twisted. Right. So basically, the Watchtower organization wants you to keep track of all your activity during the time that you're out knocking on those doors. And then that's a way for them to measure you against the impossible standard. Well, you should be spending 8 hours a month or 10 hours a month doing this. You should be living this many magazines a week, or you should be having this many return visit conversations. You should be doing this, you should be doing that. And they would have this metric, and then they would compare you to that metric. And where you fall in the organization is you're measured by that. So, the more you do in the ministry, the more people look up to you. The less that you do, the people are looking at you going, why are you not doing more? And that's
like a sales business.
Exactly. It's like a quota.
Yeah.
He who hits his quota is a winner.
Right. Oh, my bad for the departure. But so you were 18 when you started to have these feelings about leaving and deciding that it wasn't for you.
Yes. So I decided that I hadn't really decided it wasn't for me, but at 18 years old, I wanted to go away for college. I wanted to have sex with a girl. I wanted to just be with girls. I wanted to be with new guy friends. I wanted to just get out and go explore. And at 18 years old, most kids will have their parents say, "Hey, I support you going to university over here. Or if you want to go to London and just run around, I'll support you for that." My parents said, if you're not going to be a Jehovah's Witness full-time in the ministry, then you can't live in this house. So at 18 years old, not understanding what life is about, I was like, well, I guess I have no choice. I have to live in a house. I have to do what my parents say. Otherwise, I don't know where I'm going to go. And so while some of my friends went off to college and other friends went and did other things, I went and enrolled as a regular pioneer and started knocking on doors for 90 to 100 hours a month, and I hated my life at that point.
And so how long did you do that from 18 on?
So I continued on as a regular pioneer for maybe about 3 years, but I did it halfway. My heart wasn't in it. It's not what I wanted to do. So I continued on for about 3 years, and then I got married, and then the story just kind of continues from there. Okay,
so when the marriage, do you have to marry someone that is also within the religion as well?
Ideally, yes.
Okay. Ideally.
So the idea is that if you don't marry someone in the Lord, like they say, then you're subject to being disfellowshipped, or you're subject to being kind of ignored. There's another word for it. I can't disassociated maybe, where they basically say, okay, we're not going to associate with you because you're not really following the rules. And of course, sex is off the table until you get married.
Right.
So when you're 19, 20, 21, 22, your mind is not thinking right because you don't have any experience. So you marry someone who's pretty. She may not bring anything to the table. She may not even, you may not even have the same views on anything. But you're both in the same church. Maybe you have the same goals, if you will, to be somebody in the religion. So you marry that person, and then off you go.
So if you marry somebody outside of religion, but you are a good converter, do they turn their head to that? Okay, he broke a rule, but he's bringing members in.
He's bringing them in. He's bringing them
breaking
in.
down the doors.
Yeah.
You know?
I think that probably would not be looked on favorably if you were bringing members in or not, because you're not following the rules.
Okay.
And if you're not strictly walking down the center of the road, then you're either, you're just, it's not a good thing. They want you following down the middle of the road and observing all the rules.
Okay. What was the last straw? Like, what was the trigger that pushed you past your tipping point that said, all right, enough is enough? I mean, you got married, you had kids while you were still in the religion, I believe, as well.
Right.
So what was that breaking point?
Okay. So let me give you a little background. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the story. So I wrote all this down in my book, but it's kind of good to refresh it, to remember it. But so as my growing into a man, at 23 years old, I was married to this woman who was just, if I look back now, I never would have even given her the time of day, because I hadn't even grown into a man. I didn't know what I liked. I didn't know who I was or where I was going. So I got married at 23. I find myself at 30 with a 2-year-old son. And then at 32 with another 2-year-old son, a 2 and a 4-year-old. And I'm married to this woman who doesn't want to go to work. I'm trying to get through college, and she's out there knocking on people's doors, and I'm struggling financially. I'm going, wow, this is not really how I saw myself. And so one day, I'm after work, I leave my engineering job, I wasn't quite there yet, but I was getting closer to it. I leave my job and I go to a club. I go to a jazz bar. By the way, my first wife was not black. She was Indian, mixed up with some other stuff. Mm-hmm. So I go to this jazz club, and I walk in there, and I have a suit on, and the place is just full of beautiful, black, well-educated people. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. The music was great. There's something I hadn't been exposed to. And so I started, vibing in that scene, right? Going from club to club, going to jazz clubs, meeting women, meeting guys, meeting people that were kind of on the same trajectory as I was. And they were introducing me to different thoughts and different cultures and different things. Then I would have to go back home, and I would look at my wife, and I'd look at those kids, and I'd look at that house, and I'd look at this church and this religion and things I had to do for the church that I just wasn't feeling. And I was like, this is not what I want to do. I started to just hate that life. I'd stay out as long as I possibly could, take my kids to school, play with them, and go right back out in the street. I said, because this is not what I wanted to do with myself. But I was seeing some identity. I was starting to identify with my blackness, being an African-American male with a career that was starting to happen. And I was starting to be attracted to black women again. And I was just starting to feel my black power, where that was not supported in the religion, right? I'm going to the Kingdom Hall, and I'm trying to fade to black. I'm trying to fade in, trying to fit in. And that wasn't happening. I was having a lot of friction with the church now, because I was starting to really stand up for my blackness. About that same time, I started to, do what men do when they get that unhappy. I started stepping out all over the place. And I started to feel like, resentful towards the situation I had. And I said, I gotta get out of this. So I decided that I would admit to my wife and to the church that I was cheating on her. And so the first thing they did was disfellowship me, right? Once they decide that you're just incorrigible, they throw you out of the church. I called my parents, and I told them what happened, and my mom and dad said, well, until you come back to Jehovah, we can't have anything to do with you. And that was the first time. And I said, wow, that's pretty brutal, right? And so I started seeing all my friends around town, and they're walking by me as if I don't exist. I'm like, wait a minute, this is for real? These are people I grew up with in the church, been my friends for years, and now you're not talking to me at all because I don't want to do what I used to do anymore. So I said, okay, this is not good, so let me get reinstated. So reinstatement is a process by which you show to them that you're contrite and that you've been doing all these right things, and then they say, okay, we grant you readmittance to the church. So I got reinstated, and I said, okay, this is better. But the same problems were there. I still had a miserable relationship with my wife. I still did not want to be a part of the church, but I needed to feel like I had some semblance of normalcy. So let me go back in so I can have my relationships back.
Your wife had to make some concessions as well, right? So she had to come to grips with the fact that you had stepped out on the relationship, right? And this is me coming from a perspective of if the relationship was built off of love in general, right? So if it's built off love, I'd imagine that your wife would have a number of issues with taking you back. So what was that like when you decided to come back? Was she willing? Was she willing? Was the forgiveness there, or did she have her own issues with it as well?
So the forgiveness was there. I don't know about trust, but in the church, in the religion, all that's encouraged, right? They don't encourage to break up the family. So a lot of that is kind of shadowy right now, but I do know that we went on for about 5 or 6 more years. And after that, I decided that this wasn't going to be right for me. So I stepped out again. And this time it was intentional I wanted her to divorce me. And so long story short, I came home from one of my business trips, and she had packed up all her stuff and left. And I remember my mother saying to me, that's probably the best thing that could have happened to you was that she left. And because it would allow me to maybe rebuild some things. But I hadn't been disfellowshipped yet. The second time around. The second time around. Right. So the second time around, after my wife left, the elders in the church got wind of that, and they said, well, we can't let this be. So we have to throw you out again. And so it was that time that made me think, why am I a part of this church that keeps throwing me out for making a decision to do something else with my life versus continue down this miserable path. And during that time, I also started to get engaged heavily in research about the background of the church, what religion really was, the fear-mongering that religion provides, and whether or not I really wanted to be under the fear of that control. And that's when I really started to understand what the background of my religion was and how false it was and what it was steeped in. And so, a long story short, I then began to say, hey, religion is not for me. And so instead of making a play to go back to the religion, I said it's time for me to start willing myself in a better space so that I don't need to fall back on the crux of religion in order to be a happy person. Wow,
that's it. I mean, there's so many directions that I want to go.
And before you make a comment on that, I'll tell you that is to make that decision is probably one of the hardest things to do, because I think a lot of people don't understand just how hard it is to make a dead stop in where your life is going and go 180 degrees the other direction.
Yeah, because you had to make. I mean, you were having these feelings about leaving the religion, and you hadn't completely made the solid. And I imagine that had a lot to do with not really having an identity, finding yourself as a man, and not really being able to step up and be accountable for the way that you were feeling and make the responsible decision to say, hey, before I do this, or even if you did it and then say, all right, I know this is not for me, I'm not going to go back and do it. You had pretty much been indoctrinated into this religious system where you felt guilty about leaving, so you tried it again.
Correct.
And so I get that to some degree. So once you decided to just, all right, this is not working, the wife is gone, and she's taking the kids as well, what was your next steps after that? Right.
So my next steps were absolute and total and complete mourning, if you will. Realizing that, how did I get here? There's no support system. And the other thing about it too was, I was doing stuff. I was smoking cigars. I was drinking a lot. Had all these affairs with all these women. And after my wife was gone, I was having ladies coming in and out of the house. I couldn't even keep track of what one lady's name was over the next. It was out of control. And the thing that I realized one day, I woke up in the morning, I was like, oh my gosh, God is not smiting me. I'm not being smitten for all the things that I'm doing that I told I shouldn't be doing. And that's when I started to really think there must be something else going on here, because all the bad things that should be happening to me as this terrible person I am, none of it's happening. Matter of fact, I feel freer than ever. But I realized that I couldn't go on living that life. I couldn't go on smoking and drinking and having all this sex with all these ladies and hurting all these people's feelings. I needed to find out what was wrong with me. And later on, I came to realize there was nothing wrong with me. I just needed to get to who I was. My original person I should have been. For most of us, when we turn 18, 19, we go off and explore the world. We go to school or not, but we start growing into who we're going to be organically. And I have always been told since I was 12 or 13 or 14 that there's something wrong with me, from the church, from my parents. Oh, you lie all the time. Well, what 13-year-old kid doesn't lie about everything? You do this or you do too much of that. And when you hear that so much as a 14, 15, 16-year-old, it gets in your head and you start to think that there's something wrong with you as a person. So I think when I was in my mid-30s, I went to therapy out of desperation.
So how old exactly were you when this all transpired and the door was closed from the religion and you're on this journey finding yourself?
So I was 40.
You were 40 when this started?
40 years old. And most people I know at 40 years old, a lot of times they're in a mentally stuck place. And for me, I was in a mentally stuck place, but I had this will and drive because I looked around and I saw that I had no friends, I had no family. My kids were gone, off with their mother doing the Jehovah's Witness thing. My parents were off doing their Jehovah's Witness thing. And all the quote-unquote friends I thought I had were not paying attention or even being bothered with me. So I was left in a world where I had no friends or nobody. So I figured, okay, at this point in time, since there's nobody here, I have either two things I can do. I can either commit suicide, which was a constant thought, or I can power myself through, or willpower myself through to something else. And that something else was what I decided. Okay, and there were a lot of times during that process where I thought, I can't do this anymore, but willpower, which is something I think a lot of people have, and I think they're afraid to summon their willpower, but I summoned my willpower, said we're not going to end at 40. We're going to start trying to find a way to live.
My first train of thought when you're saying that you were 40, were you scared?
Scared to death. Because at one point, I had lost, my house. I had lost my business. Wasn't even sure about what career I was going to have. I was homeless, sleeping in my car. And I had went through some mental issues, not where I needed to be on drugs or hospitalized, but just doing crazy things. I had a car, sleeping in my car, washing myself up at the Starbucks, and then driving in the street and sleeping in ditches in my car and hidden behind trees. It was just a complete space of being lost in my mind and not understanding where to go for help, or just doing crazy things that were really self-destructive. And at some point in time, I just came out of that. And it wasn't because of therapy. It was just because of the fact that I realized that I was doing things that were self-destructive, but I wasn't dying. Mm-hmm. Every morning I would wake up after a drinking binge, and my car's parked in the front yard at the tree, and I don't remember how I got there. Every time I would do something like this, I would always still be here the next day. Right. And so eventually I started to realize that maybe God, because I was still stuck on the whole God thing, mm-hmm. had something greater for me than to be just ruining my life or being suicidal. So that's kind of when I started to wake up and say, I got to find a way out of the fog.
And so how did you get past the suicidal thoughts? Like, what pushed you past that point? Because I imagine after you talk about all these losses and you get into this depressive state, like how did you traject yourself out of that situation where you can be where you are today?
Yeah. So the suicidal thoughts, I think, were part of me just not knowing what I wanted to do next. How do I mourn the loss of everything I thought was important, right? And so for me, fortunately I had good health insurance. And so right about the time I started having all these suicidal thoughts, I had a breakdown at one of my friend's homes. And he's like, hey, look, dude, you have insurance. You need to go get some therapy. And I started out with a black therapist, and I started talking through those issues. And she helped me to realize that those things come and go for a reason. And all those things you held or value obviously weren't that valuable because you were not able to hold on to them. So now it's important to start trying to develop a new system of values, because those old systems of values have been taken from you for a reason. There must be some bigger reason for you to be here, and we need to understand what that was. So I don't think that suicidal thoughts would have been something I could have managed if I didn't have the opportunity to get therapy, because I needed to talk to somebody and I couldn't talk myself out of that. And I don't think I would have been the guy to really say I'm going to slit my throat or I'm going to shoot myself in the head today. But I was just taking so many risks with my life that things could have gone completely different than where they went to. Mm-hmm. So being as a black man, I would say that a key part of my recovery was therapy. We have, as black men, no matter what our background, we have to be able and open to talk to a therapist to help us deal with the issues that I had to deal with, that we have to deal with as black men, and not just from a religious perspective, but just being black in America. Right. And that's a whole nother topic.
That is a whole nother topic, and I don't know if we got enough tape to record to record that conversation. Right. But we're definitely having those types of conversations every day about what that really means. When it comes to, so what is your relationship like? What was your relationship like during this time period? We're talking at 40, when everything is gone, you've broken down, but you're clear that being a Jehovah's Witness is not what you want to be.
Right.
What happens? Where is the relationship between, first of all, your parents, your mom and dad?
Yep.
And then your wife and your children.
Okay. So before I answer that question, let me get a little bit more background on that. So right about that time, I'm 38 to 40 years old, and my wife is gone, the house is gone, everything's gone, the business is gone, the finance, the good credit, all of that's gone, right? And so I then decided that, hey, there's nothing here for me in Columbus, Ohio. Parents, siblings, family, everybody's gone. So my sister, who was living in
and
North
by
Carolina,
gone, you mean they have disassociated themselves with you.
everything, exactly. And so at this time, my sister, who is a couple years younger than me, she had left the Jehovah's Witnesses when she was 18. So she had moved around a little bit, and she was living in North Carolina. And she called me up. She said, "Why don't you come move in with me and let's just be." So I did that, and that was a life-saving event, right? So I moved down to North Carolina, found a new job, started making new friends, and from that point, I started to move around the country, from there to Atlanta, to Cleveland, to Michigan, and eventually to Chicago. So part of that moving around and exploring that I should have been doing when I was 18 years old. Instead of blindly following in the cult of religion, knocking on doors, trying to convert people into something I didn't believe anymore, I needed to live out my youth that was fading from me. So instead of being 18 or 19 and 20 and doing it, I was 41, 42, and 43 and doing that. And in so doing, I started to meet amazing people of every race, way more educated than me, way more experienced, people that had traveled all over the world. And I started getting a perspective. And I started to really learn just how much I had not experienced. And I started to open myself up and say, hey, I want you, all the people I've met, I'm meeting, and all of these experiences, I want you to come inside, get inside of me, start teaching me. And I just opened my mind up to just massive amounts of learning, reading, studies, courses, friendships, and just listening and learning and understanding all the things I didn't know. I started even reading books about God before I came to my place of where I am today. One of those key publications was a book called Conversations About God. I read through that all the way, thought that was fascinating, and then it started to get new perspectives on everything about life. And so to answer your question specifically, where I am with my parents and my kids, my parents, I still don't have a relationship with them. And even though I had a lot of anger towards them, my constant penchant towards learning from other people has allowed me to forgive them. And my parents are aged and they're unhealthy. I await their passing, sadly, but I know it's going to happen. But I forgive them for the fact that they didn't know what they were doing in a lot of ways. In terms of my ex-wife, her and I don't get along. We don't have any conversations because I look at her as being lost in that space, not interested in doing anything to move forward. As far as my children go, we've reconnected recently in the last couple months, and it's been some intense exchanges of emotion. But my kids realize the freedom that I have as an adult, and I think they kind of want to pair themselves with that, but it's not going to be an easy journey.
Yeah, I'd imagine that it wouldn't, because you spent a number of years without being connected to them.
Exactly.
And just being present, right? Irregardless of the fact that you disagree with the religious beliefs, you just weren't there. Not even sitting in the back of the in the back of the church to watch
Right.
them do what they do, or if they played sports, sitting way up high in the crowd just to say that you're there. I mean, just non-existent. So I imagine that there's some tension there. But the fact that you guys are coming together and finding a way to build a bridge, right? We all got to do work when it comes to these relationships,
Right.
if we want them to be better. So I think that's very key, and I'm excited to hear that. Why is it? So you were talking about how you, as you were going through this journey or this transformation, you started to see a little bit more of the world. You started to let more people in, and you were just gaining more knowledge. Is the religious constructs of Jehovah's Witness so tight that you couldn't have done any of that?
Yes, the construct is that tight that, because what happens is, so a cult, any cult, is all based on control. If I control the information flow to you, I control you. If I control how you think, then I control you. If I control where you go and the things that you experience, I control you. So the age of the internet is here, right? It's been here for, 10 years or more?
Better, yeah.
Right. So the information, that's an information flow that they cannot control. This is why the organization is in decline, because people are starting to learn. ex-Jehovah's Witnesses are throwing up websites that talk about all the problems of pedophilia, all the other issues that the Jehovah's Witnesses have, that they control the information flow, which is why so many of them stay. So back when I was active, they used to talk about how the internet is a dangerous place. You shouldn't have an internet in your home. And if you have internet, it should be in one room where all the family could be on the internet together, because the kids might find porn. But it was really about tidying the stem of information. They used to talk about how they used to not encourage long vacations. Why? Because if you have a longer vacation, you might meet people that might expose you to things in the world that are not as bad as they say, as we have been taught that it is. So it's all about stemming the tide of information. So when I got out of the church and I started to travel globally and meet other people, I just really came to realize that, wow, this is religion in general. If it keeps a person from growing, if it keeps a person from experiencing life, then it's not a good thing. And I also realized that everybody has their own way of worshiping God, and I'm not here to put that down, because that's your way and it should be your way. But anytime it seeks to hold a person back or to make them act in a certain way that's counter from the way they are, then I think that religion is a bad thing for that person.
So what's your idea of, or your perspective on religion versus spirituality?
Right. So again, I think a person that's heavily religious has just not come, in my estimation, along the journey far enough to reach that space of spirituality, because I feel like my truth is different than your truth. It's different from his truth. It's different from your wife's truth. That's different from every person in your audience. Everybody has their own truth to live. And I don't feel like it's your right or his right or my right to tell you what your truth is. And so once a person comes from religion and they say, okay, I don't need a Bible or a book or someone to tell me, I have my own sense of morality and I'm connected to the universe, or I'm connected to everything and everyone around me, that's the spirituality taking over. So I don't judge either. I'm connected spiritually, I believe, with everything and everyone around me, and I don't need that religious component. So I respect where everybody is on their journey, but it didn't used to be that way. It used to be, I would hear someone say something about believing in God, and I would just explode on that. But everybody has to come along their journey in their own given time. And once a person says, hey, I'm interested in crossing the chasm from being a religious person to a spiritual person, I would love to have that conversation to help them along that. Mm-hmm. It's not an easy journey. It's a realization that you don't need all that in order to be a happy person. And so, not everybody gets there.
Would you consider yourself to be an atheist today?
No.
Okay. So
but at one time I was. So when I came out of the church and I realized I needed to cleanse my mind of all the stuff I had been taught, because I didn't know what was true and what was false, I said, I'm going to stand on the ground of atheism. I'm going to stand here and say, there is no God, there is no Jesus, there's nothing but me. And so once I started to feel stable with that and saying, someone says, what do you believe? I'm atheist. And then I started to have a place, an empty place where I said, let me explore these different tenets and see what do I really believe. Now, I don't believe in an atheist perspective anymore, but I needed to have that place where I could stand steady on the ground and say, this is what I believe in this moment.
So what took you away from believing, having that, standing on the atheist platform? Like what, you're like, okay, so there has to be some version of a higher power that says that directs me or something in the universe. Right.
It's too much beauty around. There's too much beauty around on the earth. There's too many beautiful people. There's too much beauty in the universe. There's too much wonder in the spaces in between. There's just too much beautiful stuff in the world for it all to not have come by some other higher power. I don't know what that higher power is. For example, I say I believe in the universal power, the universal life. So there's something that's bigger, that's directing me to do the things that I do, that's kind of keeping everything together. But I elect to not put a name on it or to say it's God or say it's this or say it's that. It's just whatever life force is out there that's keeping everything moving the way it's moving.
Fair.
That's how I look at it.
Okay. So I wanted to go back, and I was holding on to this, but you were talking about, as a part of, the disfellowshipping process and where you started to learn and feel more about getting closer to your own identity. Do you feel like the loss of your family, meaning, and I'm only going to speak about your immediate family. We can talk about your mom, your dad,
sure,
a little later, but just your wife and well, not even your wife, because I think it sounds as though that relationship was built off something that you had already decided was fairly faulty anyway. So at some point it was going to break down anyway.
Right.
But how much of the relationship, in terms of you losing the relationship between your children, hinges on the decisions that you made to go out and be one with the world, we'll say, when it comes to the women, and then the constructs of the religion, right? Like how much, and I don't want to place blame in any place, but how much ownership did you take in terms of actually losing your family in that relationship?
So if you talk about my children, if I could go back and do it another way, if I had the opportunity to go back today to years ago and do it again, I would definitely do things differently. But I also understand I had no direction. Even at 40, because there was a whole period of time in my life that was skipped. I didn't get to grow. I didn't get to be one of those dudes, this is my dude out here. We out here in the streets, we having fun. We going to school. I didn't get to do any of that. I went straight to this serious life. And so I didn't get to do any of that other stuff. And it has nothing to do with just being around women and all that. It has, road trips and having guy friends. Like, I never had a real guy friend until 5 years ago. I mean, that dude that likes me be for the person I am, not because of the religious construct, not because of this or that, but guys have come into my life, yourself included, that have been just genuine dudes that like me for who I am, versus being forced together in a church. So if I had to go back to that time, knowing what I know now, I would definitely love to go back and say, I'm going to be 100% more present. But even at 38 to 40, I was so confused and so lost, and I couldn't support myself. And there was just a lot of issues mentally. I didn't even know where I was going. And so I would look at my children and say, okay, well, they're with their mother and the stepdad, so they're stable. So let me go out here and kind of figure out what's going on in my brain. And I feel like I wish I didn't have to do that, but then I'm glad I did that because I'm in a stable place now, and I'm a strong black man. And my kids when they came to see me a few weeks ago, I felt that they felt, wow, Dad has done well for himself. Kind of wish he was around more, but we're here now. And so I try not to punish myself over the things that happened 10, 12 years ago, because they have issues because of that, and also because of the way their mom just pulled out and just left us all hanging, and that's a whole nother story. But it's both of our faults. But I would love to be able to go back and say, what, we're not doing it this way. We're going to do it this way, and we're going to struggle through it together. But I just didn't know what I didn't know. Yeah,
hindsight is always 20/20. I just think that, life is just one of those situations where we're all growing from day to day. We're pretty solid and we stand on solid ground today as the men that we claim to be. But tomorrow we can decide something completely different about who we are.
Absolutely.
Right? And not necessarily fundamentally, but we change every day. That's just human evolution and human nature. And so there are a lot of times, and it's hard to say, there are a lot of times when certain parents are just not in the place to rear a kid, right? Just because you have sperm or you have an egg.
That's right.
Does not mean, just because you have the ability to make a child does not mean that you're mentally in a place where you should.
Correct.
Right. And a lot of times, yes, we do need that period of growth. And again, like you say, it's not just about going out and having sex with women. It's a lot about being exposed to different perspectives in the world and understanding what part of that what part is that for you to add to the rest of the world.
Right.
And so sometimes it's just recognizing that's why I think 2-parent households is vital to the growth of to the growth of children. Right. Not that you can't be, the kids can't grow up and be very successful, because I grew up in a single family home. But I think that balance where one parent is going through the motions in terms of figuring certain things out, there's another balance on the other side. Correct. Right. There's always help. And so that's key. And it's refreshing to hear that, that you admit to the fact that, I just really wasn't there. At that point, I couldn't be what I needed to be for my kids at that point in time, and making that, and I imagine that even building that bridge with your children and hearing that as they're adults now or going through adulthood, all they really want to hear is the honest truth about where you are, because we understand that it's hard. Once you get past 19 and you start seeing the world and you start paying bills and you start having real relationships and having to be committed to those, you understand the hardships of being in a relationship and doing all those things. So all you really want is honesty. You don't want the lies. Right. So what I want to ask is, at what I want to move forward in time, you know, where we're talking about where you are today,
right?
And Freedom's Witness. So, how soon after you left being a Jehovah's Witness did you decide, wait, I have a story to share that can potentially help someone do what I had to do later in life, sooner in life?
Right. So I didn't actually. So I ran into, I met this young lady in Cleveland, Ohio, who's a writer, and she was a women's coach. And just coaching through life, and in having conversations with her, she talked about her own story and how difficult her childhood was. And then she's like, "Look, I'm a teacher. I got through school and I built this life, but it was through sheer willpower, sheer you're not going to stand in my way. I will run you over with a truck, and then twice over if you stand in my way." Mm-hmm. And I started to revere her, and I started to look at her and go, "Wow, are you lying? You telling me stories? Like, show me what you went through." And she did. And it was like, "Wow, how did you manage that?" Mm-hmm. And she said, in order for you to grow, she said, you need to start, not bottle it up. You can't go to therapy and talk every day for the rest of your life. You need to start writing. I was like, "What do you mean writing?" She said, "I've seen you write. Your stuff is actually pretty good." So she said, "Start blogging." So I started writing my stories out, mm-hmm. everything from the moment I realized I didn't want to be in this to all the other problems I started having. I started writing this stuff down. And then what took shape was a book that's yet to be published. But I started seeing that there was steps that I took. They were not intentional steps. They were just, once I started to look at what happened in the last 10 years, I started seeing there were things that I did that got me one step further. And it was always one or two people on the sideline saying, "Go, go, go." Mm-hmm. One or two people that were always key in helping me move to the next step. If not helping me move there, helping me identify a potential next step. So I started down those, I just started writing and writing my feelings out. And then I started doing these YouTube stories out of pain, because I needed to identify with other people that were out there. And then the more I talked about the story, and more I started to write and make videos, I started seeing that I started to feel better. I started to have more energy. And then I realized that this story is old, and I'm doing something different right now. I'm writing a book, or I ran my first half marathon, and I started talking about those things. I'm like, okay, that's the old stuff, but did you know I'm doing something new? And then I started to notice that every time I added something new to my life, that other stuff got pushed a little further in the background, and mm-hmm. it became less and less important. And I started building this new person. And I remember the first time I realized I was on my way was I was getting out of the shower one day, and I walked by the mirror, and I was like, "Wait, what's that? Is that my new body?" Bam! Because I was running so much, and I was eating vegan, and I was eating healthy, and I was just not drinking, I wasn't smoking, and all these things were changing about my physical appearance. And I was meeting new people, and I was having these elevated conversations because I was reading so much. I'm like, wow, I'm turning into something else. So then my whole story on YouTube started changing. I started to tell people, "Hey, look, all you got to do is just be tired of what you were and say, I'm going to be something different," mm-hmm. and start building blocks and start doing different things you've never done before. And for me, it was signing up to run that half marathon. And then somebody saying, "Chris, where are you today? You're late." And somebody saying, "Hey, you're not running fast enough, or you're eating the wrong stuff. Why are you eating that? How are you going to complete the marathon if you don't do this, that, and the other?" Mm-hmm. And meeting all these people and doing these new things, that started building this new me. And then my whole story starts to change. And so my story today is different than it was 5 years ago, because my life is all about forward momentum. Mm-hmm. There's nothing in your life that you suffer from that you can't overcome. It just simply isn't. Now, you may be in a wheelchair, but you can still overcome the challenges to some extent with forward thinking, with always looking at the future, always thinking about what's next, because otherwise you're just stuck in a rut, and then your life ends and you haven't benefited anyone. Right.
So it's interesting that you bring up these new building blocks. So I'll go back to your children really quickly. What's your goal in terms of like this newfound relationship with your kids? Yeah, and it's boys, correct?
Yeah, 2 boys. Okay. To have a full-fledged relationship, mm-hmm. and to not so much raise them because they're already sort of raised. They're okay, but the connection. My job as a father is really on deck right now, because I got one that's 25 and I got one that's 20. And to say they're lost, yeah, they're lost, right? But, they both have the little girlfriends. They're doing okay. But there's a lot of bumps in the road that are coming that I've been already there, done that. So my job, I feel like as a father, is to say, hey, you can still take the bumps if you want, but I'm going to help you smooth those bumps out a little bit. And I'm going to support you in anything you want to do. It doesn't matter what you want to do. If you want to fly an airplane, what can I do to help you fly an airplane? If you want to live in Arabia or London for 2 years and sew ties, like my youngest son, then I tell me what I need to do to help you with that. Because I'm now in a position mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, financially, to help them reach those goals. And I explained to my son the other day when they were here, I said, understand where I am today. Anything I get or anything I achieve is to help you guys achieve a little bit more when I'm gone. Anything I'm doing today is all about you. And you may not come visit me but once every 4 or 5 months, but when you do, all this is here for you. When I leave this earth, this is here for you. Anything I build is here to make your life a little bit easier, because I know I owe you guys a lot from the days I'm lost. But now I'm found, and we're all found, so let's just keep going. Right. And we're doing it. It's a slow grind, but my goal is to like be that dad that's always right there, like, yo, I'm over here. And when they reach out, I'm like, hey, I got your hand. That's where it's going to be.
Right.
That's the goal.
Through the ups and downs, that's what's up. You recently got remarried? Not recently.
Not yet. Coming up.
Coming up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Engaged.
Engaged.
Yes.
Okay. So 2 questions. I think I know the answer, but what made you do it again? And then what has that done for your transformation?
Oh man, that's a great question. So this time I'm doing it authentically. So I'm 52, right? And soon to be 53. So I feel like I'm 40. Right? I'm actually living my authentic life. So what's the song? I'm living my best life. Yeah. I really am, man. I'm doing the exact thing I should be doing. I'm living in the exact city I should be living in. And I'm expressing all my interests the way I should be. Art, music, travel, all these things. And I'm with a young lady that has the same interests that I do. We run together. We run. We go to music. We have the same interest in art. We have the same interest in travel. We have the same interest in the way we decorate our homes, our home. We have the same interest in pretty much everything. And so now, instead of being forced to marry somebody because she's in a religion with me, I'm marrying somebody because, we got a lot of the same stuff and interest in common. We like to do a lot of the same things. And so this is the right thing for me. It's the right time. It's the right place. And, having lost so much, she's also bought a family. Her mom has been amazing to me because, like the mom I lost, and we just have a great relationship. Her daughter, who's just turned 16, is everything to me. That little young lady is just everything. And so I've now gotten this instant family, and they bring the stability that I've been looking for a long time. And it's all right there. I asked the universal life force to give me a family. I said, I want a pretty chocolate thing with a little pretty chocolate junior thing. And He said, okay, you ready? You sure you want this? Right. Boom. Here it is in your lap. What you gonna do with it? And I got out. It's all there. So I really have everything I've ever wanted in life, except for maybe $2 million, which will come later.
That's put me in that same mix, like right there.
Yeah. So when I look at my life from a 30,000 foot level, I have I got my little business. I got a great job. I have a nice home. I have a beautiful family now, and I have a few good guy friends, and I keep meeting them. And so really, in my family, my brothers, my sisters, they're slowly creeping their way back into my life. My sons have been to visit, and they're slowly creeping their ways back in. So really, I'm at the epicenter of everything I've ever wanted. It's coming to me because I'm drawing that.
And so how many siblings do you have?
So there's 3 besides myself, a brother and 2 sisters.
Okay. And how many have you reconnected with so far?
All of them.
All of them?
Yep. They've all been to visit me multiple times in Chicago, and they've all stepped into the center of my life. They're not. None of them are church-going members of Jehovah's Witness anymore, but because we all grew up that way, there was just a lot of issues with us coming together. But I have made myself the epicenter of the universe, my universe, and they're coming in as blazing hot stars, and they're settling around that. And I love that because it's all very positive energy. And I feel like I've done so much work that I'm attracting all that to me. I don't have to do anything, but just keep doing what I'm doing, and it's all coming to me.
Yeah, it's amazing how that tends to work when you begin to focus on who you really are. I guess the old adage that you can't really help anyone else until you know until you've helped know who you are, until you've helped yourself.
Absolutely.
Right? Because what will happen is that, and I'll use the old airplane analogy, when they're given the instructions before the plane takes off, you got to put your mask on before you put the mask on the person next to you.
So true.
And that's true in life and everything else. You have to give yourself oxygen enough so you can figure out what it is that you want, you don't like, who you don't want in your space, because otherwise there are going to be people that come into your life that you're going to let go that should have stayed, and people that you should have let go and they're staying there.
Right. They're still here, right.
Yeah, and because you don't have any idea
right.
About what that really means. You haven't taken the time to really figure out what your own identity is.
Yep.
And it's paramount. And then once you figure that out, like, everything else kind of falls into place, and you just find your circle of happiness.
Indeed.
You know what I mean? And so I think it's a beautiful thing to be going on this journey every day about becoming a better person, a better you, and doing those things, whether it's running a half marathon or asking the universe for a nice little chocolate thing to come into your
right.
life, because you know
yes.
absolutely without a doubt that's what you want.
Yep.
And then, everything else just kind of gets out of the way. Like, life is still going to give you these problems, but you'll be better prepared to handle those things because everything else is there
Correct.
to support you.
Absolutely.
And I think it's a beautiful thing. So
thank you. Yeah.
I know we're running out of time, and I want to be conscious of that as well. So we've talked about your journey and this growth process and where you are, and things are moving beautifully. Can you give me 3 things that you're currently doing to become a better version of yourself?
Yes. Okay. So I knew that question was coming.
Well, let's hopefully you're prepared for the answer. Let's go.
Well, you know what? I think that internally you may say there are 3 things. Oh, there are 3 things that I want to do better. But then you start surrounding yourself around with amazing people who will tell you what those 3 things are.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I still have my own 3, but I know for me, I'm around my soon-to-be wife and their family, and they say my communication skills are lackluster. Well, I think my communication skills are great, but they're saying no, they're lackluster. So one of the things I'm doing is trying to become a better communicator, a better listener, active listening. Mm-hmm. So I didn't just hear you, but I heard you.
Right.
And because I heard you, now I can say, okay, here's how I'm going to respond to that. And the other thing I want to do, I've always been interested in politics. So I'm really trying to become more active in my own community, as well as not be afraid to jump in the fray and learn from people who know way more than I do about politics and how the communities are run, because I want to have a more positive effect on my community that I live in, and maybe that leads to something further down the road. So, and then the third thing is become more knowledgeable on every subject. And so I do that by listening to 2 to 4 audible books a month. So it allows me to not be afraid to engage with people that are way more educated than me. So every topic from history to science to religion, just understanding what other people are talking about so I can have active, engaging conversations with other people.
No, that's beautiful. What's one of the 2 to 4 books that you're reading right now?
So I finished recently. Oh, you would ask me that. The one I'm reading now is about Nazi hunters, and about how since the early 1900s, after the World War II and Hitler went down, how these people, the Jewish folks in Europe, started hunting down these Nazis and killing them. And that's the recent book I'm reading. It's just more history. It's fascinating. Also, I'm going to Germany in November, so I'm going to be visiting some of the concentration camps. The other book I read was the one by James Comey. I can't think of the name of it right now, but where he talks about his time at the FBI, and really uncovers the true politics in the Trump White House. So, this what you get from the media and what other people say, and there's what you get from an actual insider. So those kind of things. Good stuff.
So what's the most impactful book that you've read in the last 10 years?
Wow.
That you would recommend, like, you have to, like, stop what you're doing, download this book.
Oh, my goodness. I don't really know if I could say... I would say for someone who's leaving the Jehovah's Witness religion, I would say get the book Conversations with God. Get that book and read that, because it will help you to get a different perspective from the Watchtower organization's perspective of how they give you this stuff and they feed it to you. Read Conversations with God, because it was very interesting to get another perspective of the answers to everything in life, because Jehovah's Witnesses has always had an answer for everything, and this is not Jehovah speaking. This is another a group of people who claim to have had a connection with God, and their answers are completely different than what I've ever gotten from the church. So that was pretty impactful for me.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's I'll check that out as well. I don't think I've ever even heard of that book. But I'll check it out and see what kind of perspectives I pull from it as well. And we'll have an opportunity to chop it up. You may get a text from me like, Chris, yeah, I think I'm going to have to stop at page 15. This is too much for me.
I mean, it was important for me just because I needed to I had the Jehovah's Witness noise so much in my head, I needed to get some other perspective. And it's not for everybody, but for me coming out and then say, okay, I'm going to step on this platform of atheism, do I have to think on something? Do I have to have something in my head? And I started with that book, and by the time I got done with it, I was like, okay, good. Atheism is good for now.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So before we go, tell the people where we can find you, where we can continue to hear your message and hear these building blocks of your journey as Freedom's Witness.
Yeah, so you can find me on YouTube. Just Google Freedom's Witness. It's that simple.
Sweet. So why are we going to Germany? I said we, but why are you going to Germany?
So actually, Kamiko, my fiance, she has a fascination with a lot of different art scenes around the world. So we're going for that reason. And also, I have had a lifelong fascination with Nazi Germany, and I'm going for that reason.
Okay. It should be cool. I'll touch base with you and see how that went.
It's going to be fun.
I'd love to hear about it. So, Chris, man, I definitely, again, appreciate you coming through and chopping it up with us, man. And I know this is going to be powerful, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, I look forward to doing more of it.
As always, we appreciate you joining us on this journey to become a better version of ourselves. These candid conversations are meant to inspire, encourage, and empower you with something that you can apply to your own life or share with someone that you know needs to hear it. We would love to hear how these conversations are impacting you or the people around you. So do us a solid and head on over to the review section on iTunes or Stitcher and leave us some feedback. We'd love to hear from you. Lastly, I'm proud to announce that we recently released our very first high-quality coffee table photo book, Fatherhood Through the Eyes of Black Dads. This book tells a story of 8 dads and their experience with fatherhood using powerful images. Head on over to our website awesomeblackdads.com, and click on the Projects tab for more information. You can follow us on all social media at Awesome Black Dads, and we'll see you next episode. Peace.